Welcome to PRAJNA SPARKS, a podcast where we listen to a Dharma teaching, contemplate through conversation and song, and engage in guided meditation. In this episode, we continue to explore the Dharma path, motivated by tender-hearted courage.
As we continue to explore path and the vital energies that animate us as we traverse it, I'd like to start by just reflecting briefly on that sense of reorienting the mind towards the Dharma, creating a space of simplicity within us. We're not so much rejecting or turning away from life. What we are doing is orienting ourselves to a Dharma way of engaging life. So this is what we talked about in the last episode on simplicity, the first of 3 vital energies on the path. And just bringing it to mind now, allowing our mind to clear just a little bit and turning it towards the Dharma will be a wonderful way to begin. When we talk about path in the Tibetan Buddhist context, it is very much like our everyday kinds of path that we use in our lives. There's the ground that we stand on, the path, which is the way to a certain endpoint. In other words, a cause, a path, and a result. When we look at these 3 vital energies of the path, it's actually really helpful to think about that fruition. From a Buddhist context, the ground is actually right where we are. With all of our messiness, with all of our difficulties, with all of our karma and klesha and dukkha, all of that is gunk that is sitting atop of the Buddha nature, pristine, clear, perfect, waiting to shine forth unencumbered. The path is what allows that ground of Buddha nature to come forward unencumbered. And the fruition is that completely unencumbered Buddha nature itself. So when we hear things like the path is the goal, it's very easy to think, oh, I don't have to do anything. I'm already there. That's not quite what it's talking about. What it's saying is, in many ways, you are already there. And the path is clearing away what obscures, what prevents that pristine Buddha nature, full of excellent qualities, from shining forth in that perfect fruition. If simplicity is what places our feet on that path, orients us in the direction of fruition, what is it that is actually propelling us on that path? The reason why it's good to start with fruition is to get a sense of scale. The spiritual path in Buddhism, as in many world traditions, is actually quite demanding. Buddhism gets a lot of great press for being so universalist and being so open and being about love and compassion, and it makes it sound all rainbows and flowers, but it's quite demanding, and it's uncompromising in its extent. We hear things like bringing all experiences onto the path, not just the good ones, not just the ones we're ready to process, but everything. What we think of as difficult people, challenges, disappointments, all of this becomes grist for the mill of the path. All of it becomes something we can welcome with enthusiasm when we see it as part of the path. How do we do that? We do that because of our motivation. So when we're trying to talk about propelling the momentum that carries us across the path, our motivation is key. It's that fuel. So it'd be good for a moment to just stop and think, what is the fruition that you individually are aiming for? Don't worry about what the prayers say, what teachers say, what the books tell you you should think. Just stop for a moment. Why are you doing this? It may well be that we're doing this because we've had a difficult life, or we've had a very easy life, and yet something still feels missing. We want things to change now. We want our life right now to be different, to be better. We are striving for even more. Or it might be that we've heard the teachings on karma and rebirth, the way the Buddha teaches it, not the way everyday modern culture takes it to be. And we have this sense of, I have this mind stream, and I do feel that it has a longevity that's beyond this body. I want to do the best with this mind stream so I can hand it over to the next being who will inherit it in a much better condition than I found it in, so that they can encounter the Dharma early with a lot of fervor and a lot of joy and conducive conditions for bringing Dharma into experience authentically and carry the baton the next stage of the race and keep going again and again until we attain Buddhahood. Or it might be that we're working with the Dharma because we're fed up with samsara. We want to break up with samsara as much as that terrible high school sweetheart that we were entangled with for much longer than we should have. We have the motivation to just attain that incredible peace of nirvana, the true cessation of dukkha that the Buddha speaks of in the Four Truths of Realized Beings. Or it may be that we think that's wonderful, but I couldn't imagine a freedom for myself that didn't include all the beings I'm connected with, the ones I love and know in this life. And as I expand my perspective, I recognize, oh, all beings are my family. I am interdependent, even with beings that I don't necessarily know personally. My motivation is to attain enlightenment for the sake of all beings. And if we're working in the Mahayana, Tibetan Buddhism, Zen, other styles of Buddhism under the Mahayana approach, we will hear this kind of phrase all the time: attaining Buddhahood for the sake of all beings. If you wake me up in the middle of the night and you ask me this question, what is your fruition? Why are you doing this? In a stupor, I will say, to establish all beings in the state of Buddhahood. Why? I say it all the time. It's right in the refuge and bodhicitta prayer that I repeat 3 times before every practice, the beginning, middle, and an end of the day. But are we really ready for that? Remaining in samsara until every being is free. This is a tall order, a huge ask. How do we do that? What vital energy is capable of propelling us across a path with such an immense fruition? Frankly, any of these fruitions are huge. But you take this motivation to help not just one being, but all beings, not just by feeding them or providing them money, incredibly beneficial in and of itself, but helping them to ultimate benefit of Buddhahood, where they are independently free of suffering and full of joy, love, compassion, and wisdom. Not a temporary benefit, but an ultimate one. And not just for a time or for the span that it takes to digest a meal, but for time without end. Limitless beings, ultimate benefit, infinite time. That's the highest possible motivation. It takes courage to engage the Dharma moment by moment with that kind of motivation. So courage is a word that I really love to use as a portal to this second vital energy of the path. And of course, the word courage includes within it, from the French, heart. There's a sense of heart here. And the English heart is actually really beautiful because it has a sense of tenderness, of vulnerability, but also a sense of fullness, a sense of readiness. Courage brings all of that together. The ability to move forward with strength, to do what has to be done, to hold our tenderness, our vulnerability, and even our fear in the middle of all of this that the path asks of us, that we ask of us. This is that vital energy that propels us on the path. Even if simplicity grounds us on the path, turns us in the right direction. And you could say we're all practically halfway there, because a full sense of reorientation of mind as intended in the teachings sets the wheels in motion so the rest moves spontaneously. Nevertheless, the path is demanding. This is an immense motivation, a fruition that frankly is never going to come. There will never be a time where there are no beings in samsara. When we think of samsara as misperception rather than a place, we can understand how that is the case. There will always be minds subject to the ignorance as to the true nature of things, clouding the equally present wisdom that knows the true nature of things directly. We say these phrases so many times until samsara is empty that it sounds like there is some fixed time where that will happen. I recall full well the first time I heard His Holiness the 17th Karmapa lay it out straight. There is no such time. In other words, this is a lyrical way of saying forever. So what we are saying when we say, I will remain until samsara is empty, is I will always be here for everyone. How much courage does that take? Are you ready for that? Is that what you signed up for? This vital energy of heart, of courage, is what allows us to engage with complete honesty. It's what allows us to say, oh, shoot, I did not realize that. I might have to rethink, or whatever it might be. Maybe some days we're raring to go, and other days not. Simplicity alone, reorientation of mind alone, doesn't quite get us across that whole path. What does it mean if we're really not up for that? Does it mean we have to hand in our Buddhist credentials, stop meditating and all this? There's no point because we're not capable of doing that? Of course not. Courage is so important because it says, I'm going to do what I can with what I've got. And I'm going to trust my Buddha nature. I'm going to trust the teachings of the Dharma handed down by the Buddha, enacted by the Sangha to get me where I'm going without knowing what it's going to look like or having a game plan from the get-go. That's what courage allows us to do. Do what we can with what we've got. Leading with trust. It can be really challenging even to trust our Buddha nature. When we're a hot mess and falling apart over any number of different things, it can be difficult just to trust that our nature is Buddha. At heart, that's what courage is. This courage, bodhicitta, the mind of awakening. When we look at bodhicitta through the lens of courage and heart, we gain a much more earthy, much more embodied sense of it. Just like renunciation has negative connotations that keep us from actually contacting the meaning and reality of nejung, nisarana, in the Tibetan and the Sanskrit. Bodhicitta's rainbows and flowers robes keep it immune from our connecting with its much more earthy, more frankly, terrifying aspects. Looking at bodhicitta through the lens of courage, through the heart that it takes to take all experience and turn it into practice for the sake of the path, for the sake of Buddha nature. We'll often say things like, for the sake of others. That's not wrong. And we'll often say things like, others first, me second. That's not wrong. When we are looking at it from a less than complete mindset, things go awry. Putting others first indiscriminately can mean that we don't honor our own boundaries. We don't honor our own limits. We're not genuinely caring for ourselves in a way that makes us available, healthy, and open to others. Putting us first is just more ego, more self-centered, self-cherishing, self-important kinds of practice. Bodhicitta is vital because it goes beyond these divisions of others first, me first. It starts to dissolve those boundaries of self and other, not in the sense of healthiness and wholesome propriety, but in the artificial sense of where do I stop and someone else begins. This misperception of a self that stops where others begin creates division. As soon as we think self, the natural consequence is other. To care for self and other genuinely, we begin by letting go of conceiving beings as either self or other. Courage and heart puts Buddha nature first, the path first. How do we deal with someone who's difficult? Do we put them first? Do we put us first? What courage and heart is saying is we put the path first, the forward motion, the momentum of the path towards manifesting Buddha nature comes first. So sometimes when we deal with a difficult person, we're able to extend ourselves for them because that is actually propelling us forward on the path. That is actually moving us closer to manifesting Buddha nature. Other times, it may be that we have to let go of helping this individual person in this individual time because the pressures and the impact on ourselves in that moment stop the momentum or even reverse it. This also brings a much less dualistic me versus them kind of mindset to the path. It's what actually starts to approximate the realization of full-on bodhicitta, full-on awakened mind that has actually realized emptiness directly, the nature of things, without any dualistic concepts. When we get to that, then all of this becomes quite simple. In the meantime, it takes courage. It takes heart. In the Mahayana Buddhist path, we speak of 5 major paths. The third one is that path of seeing, that moment I just alluded to, directly seeing emptiness. A few steps before that, the phase of the path is called forbearance, patience, because it's actually kind of excruciating to challenge our ideas of reality, of who we are, of what others are, of what holds true, to turn it upside down. If there's one thing that I would highlight as a difference between engaging the Buddha Dharma in the West as opposed to the monastic tradition that I was trained in a Tibetan Buddhist monastery in Nepal, it's that we lose a bit of the sense of challenge in the West. this monastic tradition gave me a love of that challenge. It's aimed in things like debate, sharpening our intellect, letting go of our opinions. Even when we've moved forward, even when we've advanced, we let go of that again. There's no end in sight to our growth, our development, our unity with all beings and with reality. Make no mistake, this takes a great deal of heart, a great deal of courage, and it's worth every moment.
What a strikingly beautiful teaching. I was so moved by that. I just felt my heart so full, so aware. Don't know if you saw my face during all of the teaching that you were doing, but at one point you said, if we make a commitment to staying in samsara until it's empty, we'll be in samsara forever, and the fruition will never come. And I don't know if you saw my face right then, but I said out loud, oh my God. It was so striking, so realistic, so facing truth. And the courage of that commitment became absolutely clear and palpable. And so I just want to say that so stood out to me in what you were saying. I realize that the commitment you're talking about is the one that we take on the Mahayana path. And that's not what everyone is going for. So I was curious about how you might see courage as it relates to other motivations people have for Dharma. And also if there's anything more you'd like to share about that.
That's a very good point. Courage is the second of three terms that I use as portals for understanding traditional terminology about vital energies of the spiritual path as presented in Tibetan Buddhism, which is a Mahayana path. Courage, in particular, is the portal to having a more visceral, immediate understanding of bodhicitta. Bodhicitta is a motivation quite particular to the Mahayana, as you mentioned, when I'm talking about it in this context. Courage is a way into understanding bodhicitta, which has a lot of texture and so much glorification that it can seem both impossible and, oh, I already have it. We call each other bodhisattvas, or we say, oh, you have such bodhicitta. Courage is a portal to understanding it because, as you say, it gives us a really striking sense of what we're talking about in a more immediate way than we perhaps may get in other understandings of bodhicitta. That's not to say, however, that courage isn't necessary in a broader sense for every kind of motivation, on a Buddhist path, on a spiritual path, on a humanitarian path, what have you. I'll get to that in a minute. But first, to be clear, what I mean by the fruition isn't going to happen is that some time in the future where all beings are enlightened and we're all meeting at the Buddha bar, hanging out, that's not going to happen. Buddhahood happens. Bodhisattvahood happens. Realization, that happens. None of those things happen in ways that are intellectually accessible for us now. There isn't a place or a time of samsara, where it started or where it ended. These are all skillful methods that the teachings use to give us a handle on what's going on here. It's important not to reify those. The Bodhisattva has a much more panoramic perspective than we can even begin to imagine. For us, that sounds daunting, even impossible, certainly tinged with craziness to commit to something that's never going to come to be. The Bodhisattva isn't constrained by our cognitive limitations, our conceptuality. The realization of emptiness is the realization of infinite potentiality, the realization of complete interdependence, the realization of a compassion that knows no end. Courage there takes a much more powerful quality, than the sense that we have right now of doing something daunting. So that segues into your question, which I think is a really valuable one. Not every Buddhist or even every spiritual being or even every being has an interest in this level of motivation, attaining Buddhahood for the sake of all beings. Nevertheless, whatever path we're walking, be it a spiritual path, a humanitarian path, a secular path, any kind of path of being the most we can be, undoubtedly, that takes heart. It takes courage. We know that in our lives. Part of why you responded the way you did, and I did see your beautiful face as it went through all these different emotions, is because you recognize it, don't you? You can feel it.
Yeah.
Whatever it may be, we know that there's always something that we're going to pull ourselves up from our bootstraps and move forward into. So the motivation of the Mahayana Buddhists is that of the Bodhisattva path, to attain enlightenment for the sake of all beings. Then there's also the motivation of what's called arhathood, personal liberation, which sometimes can sound like it's being demeaned. And that really upsets me because there's nothing to demean in the motivation of arhathood. It's an immense intention. It's an immense achievement in and of itself just to aim to attain arhathood. And it takes immense courage to value nirvana, which at first feels intangible and maybe even fairy tale like, more than we value the palliative things that we encounter in our life. Then the courage of seeking to improve this mind stream for the sake of another being who will inherit it. Is that happening? Is that not happening? Maybe we don't know. There's a bit of courage involved in that. The courage of making our life better here and now, irrespective of what else happens. That takes a lot of heart. Anytime we start to connect with our mind, our heart, our being, with this kind of frank honesty, with this kind of no blinders approach that is both tender and yet real, in the sense of not looking away, not blinking even when there's something difficult. That takes courage. I don't care if you're a Buddhist, some other tradition, or if you don't even identify as a spiritual being. Our motivation, our intention shapes our experience. Living takes courage.
Yes, it does. And that frank honesty is, I think, what's so important in terms of any of these paths, because it's about pulling aside the veil of denial of impermanence, denial that we will be able to be satisfied in samsara, that there are these truths of what life is like in samsara. And we have so many ways that we try to look away. I see that all around me. I see that in myself, trying to find ways around it. Then I just keep coming back to it. It keeps coming back. That acceptance of reality is challenging. I will share a little bit about some way that I've been working with that recently. There's this thing that's a reality, which is that people are an unreliable source of refuge. And when I say that to people who aren't Buddhist, and even some people who are, it sounds so depressing. It sounds like I've given up on people somehow. I actually find it very useful to remember that, because whenever I come back to the fact that people are not going to be a refuge from the kleshas, they're not going to be the thing that helps me to feel this sort of stable happiness. And as wonderful as people are, and as much as I value human connection, and people are really my favorite things, I like nothing better than people. Maybe my cat. but people really win most of the time. What I know is that people will always disappoint in a way because they're just doing their own thing in samsara. And so I can keep going back to people and hoping that they will protect me and shield me from whatever feelings I have that are coming up that are hard for me to deal with. They won't do that. They can't do that on an ongoing basis. The best thing that they can do is to keep reminding me that they are not a reliable source of refuge. The best thing that they can do is to keep disappointing me and to keep making me feel the things that I don't want to feel and not protecting me from them. Because one, they can't do that. And two, even if I think that's what I need, it's actually just what I want. And what I really need is reality. And that's the reality that I feel like I keep coming back to. And that's the reality that takes a lot of courage to face. And I find myself trying again and again to make people be that thing for me. And they keep reminding me that they're not going to. And that I have finally come to realize is the greatest gift that they give me.
That's absolutely beautiful. It's a real fruit of practice to be able to take the things that are most painful, the things that open our vulnerability to the elements, and turn that into a teaching, not just a transient teaching, not just something you're like, oh yeah, I'll have to remember that, but something that you live the way you're describing it. And what you're saying is really true. And it isn't, sadly, limited to people. It's everything. And we all have the one hook in samsara that keeps dragging us back in. But, maybe it's the job, it's the success, it's the book deal, it's the song deal, it's the perfect relationship, it's the perfect house, it's the perfect decoration for the perfect house, it's 300,000 followers on Instagram. Samsara is the abusive partner. It always has a slick way to hook us into believing that this time it'll be different. And it never is. It's just another veneer, another facade. Sometimes, as we get more intelligent and more evolved, these images that samsara dances before our eyes become more subtle. They become more entrancing. But it never ends. This cycle of disappointment. Every time we think, aha, I knew there was some kind of refuge in samsara. That's what the Buddha means when he says that life is dukkha. He gets a lot of bad press for, everything is suffering. What he means is, how can anything short of completely living your perfect Buddha nature be anything but dukkha? How could you not suffer if you're not completely embodying all that you are? So the root of all suffering, the root of even craving is ignorance, specifically the ignorance that does not know the true nature of things. That sounds very fancy. It sounds like a pat answer. And we might have some difficulty in connecting with what that is. But you mentioned a way that we are all familiar with how that appears in our lives. Denial. It's one of the more obvious ways that a very subtle, very slippery kind of ignorance appears. When somebody pulls the wool over our eyes, and then we come to realize we've been in denial or we haven't been seeing things clearly. All of a sudden, we do. That's a small kind of experiential example of what it'll be like on that path of seeing when we directly realize the emptiness. All of that denial, all of that ignorance, all of that not knowing of things vanishes. It's the path of seeing. And some things can't be unseen. Shunyata definitely cannot be unseen.
Wow. Indeed. I feel like I keep getting the lessons heightened the higher my denial goes. I am going to text 20 people to get someone to go hear my favorite 80s cover band with me, and every single one of them will say no. And I realize someone else would have given up after 2 or 3, but not me, because I think that people are going to do it for me this time. Someone's going to want to go. And after 20 people, I finally go, nope, no one's going to go. Then I remember, oh, right, people, not only are they not a reliable source of refuge, they're not even a reliable source of company to go hear an 80s cover band. You know, that there's all these different levels of it. Samsara will keep showing us the truth, and we'll keep finding lots of ways of not wanting to look at it.
Actually, it's not samsara showing us the truth. Samsara is misperception. Samsara isn't out there somewhere. It's not the people, it's not the places, it's not the things, it's not the jobs and the money. Samsara is our misperception, our ignorance of the true nature. So what keeps appearing is we're clinging. We crave that ignorance to be true. Whenever we cling to something that's untrue, what's going to happen? There's only one possible end result to clinging to something that's not true. Eventually, it'll be proved to be untrue. It might take 10 minutes. It might take 2 texts. It might take 20. But truth will out. That's the thing we have to go on. And we often hear, especially in the bodhicitta teachings, when we're talking about courage, the teachings try to expand our heart. How? By trying to help us understand how all beings are like our mothers. Oh, then people say, well, I don't have a very good relationship with my mother. Or I don't know, I never met my mother. Or that's not the point. The point is how closely connected we are to individuals. Then there's an alternative teaching, which I think you're touching on. If you can't see every being as your mama, maybe you can see every being as your lama. Every time they let you down, they point you to refuge. Every time they bring up anger or make you wait, they point you to patience. Every time they challenge your boundaries, cross what is appropriate, they give you a lesson on your own discipline, your own care for yourself, which is the foundation for caring for others. A lot of this is starting to bleed already into the third vital energy, that sense of paradox, where to care for other, you have to care for self, and there's never a self or another to begin with. We can gain a lot from this attitude that you're referencing, seeing every being as our Lama, every experience as our teacher. I find that really vital. I find that really compelling. I like to call this the conspiracy to enlighten me. Everything in our life is conspiring to enlighten us. It's the question of whether we'll follow the lead of samsara further into this abusive relationship, which has never once worked out the way it was promised, or we'll pivot, reorienting our mind to the Dharma, take heart, and with courage move forward.
I love this paradox that you put out there about what do we do when there's somebody else who we're in conflict with maybe, or trying to figure out, are we going to put them first or put ourselves first? And people sometimes tell me that they want practical advice on the podcast, things that are relevant to the struggles in their everyday experiences. So I've been saying, oh, please, Yeshe, will you do something on dealing with difficult people? And I was absolutely blown away when you wove it into the teaching on courage. I thought that was brilliant. And then I thought, oh, goodness, it's the same answer for all of the everyday struggles. You put the path first, and then it's clear what to do.
Yeah, I get that kind of question all the time too. And I wish I had pat answers. If I did, I'd put them on business cards and hand them out to everybody every time I get that question. And it doesn't quite work that way. At some point, when we are really driven by heart, when our heart is leading us in the spiritual path, the Dharma becomes something more than what we're willing to spend 5 minutes on every day, listening to a podcast or a guided meditation. It becomes what guides our life. And then the answers go back to that first vital energy. They become simple. That's the priority. Sometimes we can get confused. I don't want to minimize that. Even when we say the path comes first, it can be confusing which is actually going to benefit my path, which isn't. Because we have a lot of confusion. We have a lot of habits that obscure the way forward. But our decisions, our choices are really important. And sometimes we might even realize that we've made choices or put things into action that are actually harmful for us, that don't take care of our spiritual well-being the way we need to. That's fine. We just have the courage of facing that. Yeah, that didn't work out the way I wanted it to, and trying again. That also is courage. Failing beautifully, getting ourselves up and starting all over again. The answer is always the same. Let heart lead. By heart, I mean the courage, the motivation to do what it takes to move that much closer to manifesting your true nature, Buddha nature. Here's something to try when you're facing challenges. Prioritize the momentum of your unique path towards unveiling your Buddha nature. Sometimes conditions allow us to extend ourselves. Stretching towards other care then is healthy. It propels us closer to manifesting Buddha nature. Circumstances may be such that they call for holding our vulnerability more gently for a time, until we can rise to the occasion with resilience. Letting it be more about momentum in this way allows us to not take things so personally. It takes out the self-other dichotomy that is always the trademark of troublemaking. Relating to our experience through this kind of sacred creativity does not yield pat answers. It encourages intimacy and responsiveness to our own mind and the shifting landscape affecting it. Wakefulness and the courage of this frank and kind introspection allows us to privilege our spiritual development over dualistic projections such as me and them, right and wrong, praise and blame, hero and victim. It goes on without end. That doesn't play well in a 20-minute podcast.
And yet, that is the time we have. This has been Yeshe and Tania. Next, you'll hear Heather with a song, and then Zopa offering a guided meditation with Shivnee on Tibetan singing bowls. Thank you for listening. If you have questions, please email us, sparks@prajnafire.com. Visit us on the web at prajnafire.com or follow us on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook at Prajna Sparks. May all beings benefit.
I could concentrate with patience and sweep away the kleshas, wishing joy for humankind. I'll be sitting on my cushion saying prayers with deep devotion with a motivated mind. I could cultivate my insights, aspire to spiritual heights, priorities aligned. Dharma songs I'll be singing and aspire to upper clinging with a motivated mind. Oh, I strive to apply ethical conduct. I'll notice when I start to self-destruct, and then I'll cease and readjust while I'm resting in samadhi, loving everybody. Prajna gets refined. I'll get past dualism as I release egoism with a motivated mind. I could face all that is real, that's unreliable, the loneliness that smarts. I could face all the feelings, even those that aren't appealing, with a brave and tender heart. I'll reflect on motivation and on reincarnation, the karma Arlen part. I long to release all beings from cycles of suffering with a brave and tender heart. pretty, so pretty, but reality's not so. Tenderness may give you vertigo, but then you'll see with honesty it's a stunning revelation. We won't end up in heaven or at the Buddha bar. On the path of Mahayana, every being is your Lama with a brave and open heart. Tears will wash away mascara when I'm reborn in samsara. Misperception can bewitch. I'll set down that margarita and develop bodhicitta on this path that takes courage. I've been hiding in denial, enjoying my lifestyle, seeing you and I apart. I'll be brave as a lion with compassion purifying, and I'll stop all that denying, cause the Dharma will inform us, so take heart. We're on the path of Dharma, of Buddha Shakyamuni. We hear it is a wonderful path, enlightened we'll all be free. Enlightened we'll all be free. The wisdom path of Shakyamuni. Buddha, 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 Buddha. Enlightened we'll all be free. The wisdom path of Shakyamuni. Buddha, 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 Buddha. Buddha, 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 Buddha.
Hello, friends, and welcome to this meditation. Let's just begin by settling our minds, settling into the present moment, appreciating the unique opportunity that being alive and present right now affords us in this meditation session, a session that will never be repeated again, that's unique to this time and place. How wondrous that we get to engage in it right here and right now, this opportunity to deepen our own appreciation and knowledge of our minds and how life is, how life works. Let's take a moment to appreciate that. Begin just settling our minds by focusing on our breath, focusing on that natural, steady inhalation and exhalation as the breath flows into our body and then is released back out. This is all you need to do at this moment. There's nowhere else you need to be. Just let yourself settle into your seat, into your presence, into being embodied and present in mind. In this vibrant, clear state, which is both easeful and alert, allow your attention to fully face your own heartfelt wish for radiant, unobstructed, genuine happiness. Not the kind of happiness or pleasure that we have learned to settle for in life, because it seems like that is all that there is. That's the best we can hope for. But the full thing, that kernel that we keep nestled deep inside, hoping against hope that life and experience is going to provide for us. We armor so frequently against feeling it because it feels too risky, it feels too vulnerable. But in this moment, let yourself feel fully that yearning, that core wish, scary as it might be. We don't have to make excuses for it or talk ourselves out of feeling it because of that fear that we'll never get it. Right here and right now is the opportunity just to fully experience it. Experience the yearning for that. Don't turn away. Don't run and hide from it because of all the disappointments that we've had, all the sorrow. Just allow yourself to connect with that innermost yearning that we have. This is one of the ways that we can reorient our mind towards what is meaningful, towards the Dharma. Recognizing that this deep, core, heartfelt yearning is true, not just for us, but for others as well. We can start to experientially feel into the necessity of walking the path, not only for ourselves alone, but for everyone. We can discover our immense potential and build up our ability to embody it here and now by allowing ourselves to touch fully the vulnerability of this yearning and the heartbreak that the fact that all of the glamorous appeal of samsara hasn't and won't provide us with what we are really looking for. This is true for me. It's true for you. And true for all these beings toiling and struggling endlessly day after day, night after night for happiness. When we allow ourselves to see clearly without looking away, it breaks our heart. And it breaks our heart open so that we can really be driven in our lives by our heart. So we can be guided by the path, by the Dharma. Ironically, it is also here that we find the power of our courage. We discover that we actually are capable. Let's sit now for a moment, cultivating this courage. Let your attention rest one-pointedly on your deep, heartfelt wish for genuine happiness and on the recognition that this is also true for all beings. We are not alone in this heartfelt wish. Look clearly and rest in the present experience. If thoughts or doubtful mental chatter arise, don't engage them, don't reject them. Just come back to the present moment, that experience of seeing clearly. Thank you for this practice of cultivating courage, for stepping up into our full capacity and potentiality. Thank you for all that you do.